You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Welcome to the Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. My name is Neya Patel, Account Manager and CFO Lead at Criticaleye, and I'll be your host today. I'm delighted to be joined by Keith Cochrane, Chair of Qlar Group and Non-Executive Director at Qlar Group. So welcome, Keith.
Welcome, thank you now.
It's great to have you with us. We're recording this podcast from our Group CFO retreat, where we've currently brought together over 80 CFOs, chairs and non-executive directors for 2 days. There has been a lot of food for thought over the past day, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next day has to offer. Building on one of the sessions we had earlier, today's podcast will be centred on the transition from Group CFO to Group CEO, which, Keith, I know you'll be familiar with, having done this transition at Qlar Group.
Not just at Qlar Group, in fact at Stagecoach Group as well.
Wow.
So I've done it twice.
Even more expertise. That is brilliant. Keith, great if you can provide a short summary on your personal career journey and then share what were the key drivers that led you to transition from CFO to CEO.
Okay, well, I trained as a chartered accountant with Arthur Anderson a few years back, then went into industry, initially with Stagecoach Group, the bus and rail business, becoming both CFO and then subsequently CEO within that business. Beyond that, I then took on the CFO role at Qlar Group, a Glasgow-based international engineering group, and again moved on to the CEO role there for a 7-year period. Most recently, I've continued with a sort of a CEO agenda, as it were, but in the private equity world rather than the public company world, being chief executive for 5 years until last August, when I became chairman at Schenck Process, which is now Qlar Group, following our rebranding earlier this year.
Fab, thank you. I'd just love to build on that a little bit further. What were some of the biggest shifts in responsibilities and some of the challenges you faced when stepping into the Group CEO role?
Well, I was fortunate when in both instances, when I took on the CEO role, that I had been the CFO role previously. So in a sense, I understood the business. I was aware and knew the individuals, and aware both of the challenges and the opportunities that existed within both businesses when I took on the CEO role. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognise the CEO role is very different from that of the CFO. You have a far broader perspective. There are far more demands on your time. You have a role in terms of managing the board and liaising with the chairman and other board members. Particularly in the public company world, you have a far higher sort of external stakeholder engagement role. And of course, all roads lead to the CEO's office when there's a problem, when there's a challenge, be that around health and safety, be that around technology, be that around operations, a customer issue. There is always, ultimately you are the go-to person, and therefore I think you have to be prepared for that variety of challenge, some of which, when you move from a CFO role, which it tends to be somewhat more defined, requires you to move outside your comfort zones, and for you to still be able to build on what you've learned as CFO, because I think that gives you a series of building blocks. It gives you a platform from which to extend into the CEO role, because you will understand the business, you'll understand and know quite a number of the people within the business already. So it's a great platform to move, but equally very different role, as I say.
That's really insightful. Thank you so much. And it's clear that moving into the CEO role comes with a whole new set of responsibilities. Somebody actually mentioned it's like flipping a switch. Because obviously you've now got culture, people, strategy. You mentioned the stakeholder piece as well, and then thinking about the bigger picture. I imagine it takes quite a lot of mental flexibility to take on that shift.
Well, I think you need to be prepared, and I think the first time I did it, I probably didn't quite appreciate the breadth of projects. I probably went into it thinking, I know this business, I understand what this role involves. I've been working in partnership with the previous chief executive for a number of years, so therefore, yes, it's a different job title, yes, it's a different role in terms of responsibilities, but fundamentally, I'm starting from a point that I have a good understanding and knowledge of it. But I think I was very quickly put myself to rights as regards that thought process, and realizing that, as you say, the people agenda, dealing with the multiple challenges that particularly in global businesses you have in managing people, very much being seen as the person people look to, both in terms of, and we talk a lot about tone from the top, but I wouldn't underestimate the impact on which you can have as chief executive in the business. It's probably a several times factor of the impact you can have as CFO, because the business looks to you as the executive leader. They look to you when there is a problem. They look to you to articulate the style and approach that the organization should take. And they look to you to give them confidence as to the vision and strategy and where the business is going. So I think the ability to communicate effectively to all elements of the business, be that from different functions, different roles, different countries, I think is a very important part of positioning yourself as an effective CEO and being able to ensure that the organization gets behind you, because any chief executive is only as good as the team they've put in place, only as good as the broader workforce that work for the company. So one's got to be a bit careful that it doesn't go to your head as well, but getting that organization to work with you and positioning your agenda as their agenda, I think is a key element and a key factor that makes for a successful CEO, and is a changed perspective from that necessarily of the CFO role.
It sounds like a really exciting role that comes with a lot of responsibility.
It does, and therefore and you can never shrink that. And as I said earlier, ultimately the buck stops with you. I recall sometimes when we'd product quality issues in a sense in the States, and ultimately I'm not an engineer, I'm an accountant by background, but yet people are saying, right, well, what should we do here? How do we engage with the customer? What do we do? Do we recall the products? And you've got to learn quickly. You've got to make sure you're getting the best information you can in terms of making those decisions. But equally, ultimately, you need to be prepared to make a decision as chief executive across a range of topics where you are not necessarily the subject expert. And I think that's one of the key differences, again, with CFO. CFO, you tend to be making important decisions, but in the context of financial matters or contributing to broader decision making, but very much contributing rather than necessarily being the ultimate decision maker, in the sense that a chief executive can be in the context of an executive, in the context of presenting to boards or to shareholders or other external stakeholders.
And I think it links back in quite nicely with what you mentioned earlier about having a high-performing team around you who can then have that area of expertise to then allow you to be successful as a CEO as well.
I think that's absolutely fundamental, and it was one of the first things I did, in particularly my second stint as chief executive, because I learned very much from the first one, that having a strong team, building capability, building the next generation of leaders is possibly one of the most critical things that a chief executive can do to protect the long-term stewardship, to provide that long-term stewardship for the business and to enable us success, not just because in many ways we all want our businesses we're involved with to be successful, but success is not necessarily just what happens during our tenure. It goes beyond our tenure, so positioning the business to enable it to continue to succeed, both in terms of the people decisions you make, creating the right culture across the organization, building the right sort of strategic agenda, and then that alignment and ownership that you have more broadly across the organisation, I think are all elements that make for a successful CEO.
On the topic of the team, I know you've obviously made the transition from CFO to CEO. How did you avoid getting back into the financial detail once you became CEO? And linked to that, what helped you focus on the bigger picture, and how did you empower your new CFO? Because I can imagine it could be quite easy to dip back into the financial.
I think it's very easy. So I think, first of all, you've got to be really, really disciplined, and therefore there's a bit of personal discipline about making sure you give the new CFO the space and the opportunity to develop and don't seek to sort of effectively continue to do your old job, their job now, but at the same time be there for them in a sense that particularly in the first year or so while they're building up their knowledge of the business. If it's been an external, obviously if it's an internal appointment, it's slightly different, but in terms of building up their knowledge and external appointment, being there in a sense of being able to give almost a bit of constructive support, not in the spotlight of the board or in the spotlight of the executive team, but very much on a one-on-one basis, and help. You can be part of almost their education or building their understanding of the business, and by helping explain both the business, the key areas they should be focusing on, but then it is about stepping back and letting them, not trying to run the financials, because I've seen it happen before. If you try, I've seen it in a slightly different context, but if the business thinks there are two leaders in a function or two people that they should be reporting to, businesses or individuals in businesses and teams can get really confused. So there always has to be a clear line of sight in terms of reporting and accountability, and for the finance function and financial reporting, that very clearly goes through the CFO, and it's incumbent on the CEO to respect that and to be seen to respect that, so it does not undermine the CFO or in many ways the reporting lines that exist within the business. Absolutely critical. At the same time, as you move into CEO, being a finance guy is really, really helpful, particularly if you've been the previous CFO, because you've sort of got a nose for the numbers. It means you can immediately, know where to focus in if there's a business issue, or when you're doing your management reviews or budget reviews. You're not necessarily you're not reliant on the finance function per se, because you have that knowledge and that skill set yourself, and you've built that up through your own understanding of the business, and therefore I think it helps you, understand as CEO the key levers, the key drivers, potential issues that might be around the corner, as you look at it through a CEO lens as distinct from a CFO lens.
I think it's like finding that balance, isn't it?
It is finding that balance, and equally it's a balance. Some things like dealing with banks, and really you should not be involved with the CEO. Investors, you'll let the CFO take the lead. Because again, there's so many. This is almost the ultimate point. There are so many things on your time, or demands on your time as chief executive, that you can't be all things to all people, and in a sense, you've got to focus and prioritize, frankly, on the areas that are new to you as the new chief executive, and in building your style, your engagement, your strategy, vision, as I've said, for the business, and the CFO should be able to run the finance function, and then as the CFO gets more established, then I'd hope that he can contribute beyond just the finance function, and you start to give him the development opportunities to broaden out his career in the way that I did as CFO, which enabled me to broaden out my career and move into a CEO role as well.
I was recently having a conversation with a CFO that we're supporting, and he referenced that his CEO used to be the former CFO of the organisation. And the problem is he often finds the CEO ends up getting caught back into the details of the financial matter and what's going on in the financial realm. The CFO's team finds it really difficult because you'll have conflicting opinions, one from the CEO, one from the CFO. And I think that's where, if you have stepped up from the CFO to CEO role, it's making sure that you're able to empower your CFO step away from the detail, and they just
there
didn't
needs
know
to
where
be
go.
complete clarity, and I think you sometimes underestimate the impact you can have as chief executive in an organization. Even when you visit sites or you engage with individuals across a business, and it's part of your daily routine. But for those individuals who may not be seeing you, or maybe only seeing you once every 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it is, that engagement, that conversation is actually quite important to them in the context of the business. So I think being very mindful, or as a new CEO, and you're bringing in a new CFO alongside you, that dynamic, and giving this, because it's ultimately back to the point that we were saying about successful teams. Tends to be that if you have a successful CFO, then that is making your life easier. Yeah, so it is in your interests as chief executive to help an individual develop into the role, give them the space to develop, because ultimately, when they have built their knowledge of the business, built the respective colleagues around the organization, they're going to be a far stronger contributor to the broader executive team than if that's not the case. And back to what we're saying, ultimately it's about the success of the team. You're looking for you should never be shy of seeking out contributions from executive team members and colleagues, because that's how, I think, to my mind, you engender the highest chance of success going forward as a business.
Absolutely, and I think having that CFO-CEO partnership and dynamic is so important, being able to, I guess it's a balance as well between supporting one another to mitigate isolation, and then also having that critical challenge too.
I think it is, and because as a CEO, as a background in finance, you understand the numbers, you can provide probably a bit of challenge from time to time. Sometimes it's required, sometimes it's not. But sometimes the challenge is just more you testing to make sure you understand what is happening here in terms of what are the underlying dynamics in terms of the numbers. And because it's important that you have it clear in your own head, because sometimes you still have to understand. You can't abrogate complete responsibility for the financial numbers because you're the chief executive ultimately, so you've got to be prepared to talk to them from a board point of view, from a city point of view if you're a public company. So having that understanding, but there's always, it's the way you go about that in a way that is seen to be supportive rather than sort of unnecessarily challenging.
Thanks, Keith. Love to shift gears slightly. How did your approach to engaging with the board and other internal stakeholders, I know we've referenced the CFO already, but including the Chief People Officer, change when you became CEO?
Well, I think let's talk about the Chief People Officer first of all. She became my one of my key partners and sounding boards. Very much, the importance of the people agenda, setting out the vision and strategy and the tone of the business that we wanted to establish. And I built a very strong working relationship with her and used her as a sounding board, frankly, on lots of different topics beyond just the people agenda, because she had as inevitably all CPOs do, they build up their own networks across the organization, and they're a very good means of finding out what is the mood within the organization, what's worrying people, where are people excited in terms of or opportunities, and using that as a means to just ensure that back to this, you retain the cohesiveness of the team, and indeed are optimizing the broader organization's potential and capabilities. So I think really, really key. And again, in my role dealing with technology and engineering were not my core disciplines. So where we had a sort of, in essence, a group engineering director who was responsible for R&D and technological developments. So again, working with him to test and look at how we could move forward that technology agenda most effectively, was another an important sort of almost line of sight that I had. And then in terms of the board, I think the dynamic changes from CFO to CEO as a board, because you tend to, as CFO, you tend to principally deal with the audit committee chair, because that's your direct sort of, let's call it dotted reporting line, as it were, in terms of, working through the financial reporting requirements with the audit committee chair and ensuring he and his committee have what they need to be able to sign off the accounts. As chief executive, you tend to be, you're dealing with the chairman. I would speak to the chairman every week. You would be using him as a, both as, you would report, you would tell him what was going on in the business, and, in a very transparent manner. So he was aware, he's one of the few people you can speak to openly about maybe some of the challenges you're facing with people or specific issues within the business, and use him in some ways as a sounding board as well. And I think the best sort of chair-chief executive relationships have that sort of, that there's a genuine dialogue and engagement between both, that particularly the chief executive can leverage off the experience that the chairman possibly has and is able to bring to bear. You obviously have to be available, and you are available for all the non-executive directors. And again, you're reporting to the board on a range of different topics now. But again, this is where, certainly in my experience, I was keen to involve and bring to the table the subject matter experts to be able to present, because it's also good for the board to see almost the depth of talent that exists within the business. So I would recommend any chief executive and encourage them to, give exposure to your top team, or give the board exposure to your top team, particularly in the context of sort of specialist subject areas where they can provide insight and expertise, which I'm sure will help inform, because part of your job is to make sure the board is fully engaged and aware of both the challenges and the opportunity that the organisation faces, so that again they can fulfil their role, both from a stewardship point of view, but also in terms of providing that constructive challenge and almost slightly sort of detached objectivity that you get from being a non-executive or not sort of in the thick of executive management.
The CEO relationship with the chair and board is such an important one, an
Yes.
aspect of leadership. So it sounds like what you're describing sounds like a real shift in how those interactions are managed, having transitioned from CFO to CEO. And I know you referenced the piece about the CPO-CFO relationship being so important. And I think because you're setting the culture of the organisation now in that CEO position and setting that high-performing team, that relationship seems like one to definitely be nurtured.
Very, very much so. And I think, again, back to the boardroom question, I think, the board look to you as chief executive. You're running the business on a day-to-day basis. You are a member of the board, typically in the UK context, but equally on behalf of the collective board, and therefore you're accountable to them. The CFO tends to be a member of the board as well, but I think very much, is viewed as to provide a specific set of skills and experience, particularly in a public company world environment, that are necessary, and that your interaction with your CFO in the board context is also important to ensure that you create opportunities for your CFO to be able to engage with the board. I've seen instances in the past where the CEO effectively dominates proceedings, and in many ways is almost reporting the finance number, and the CFO's sort of sitting there not saying very much, or maybe get 5 minutes at the end. That's not how it should be. It's very much, very consciously you should be creating space in the board for your CFO, more so when you've been the previous CFO. At one level, the board will be looking at that dynamic between yourself as the CEO and the CFO, because they will want it to be successful for the benefit of the business. But another, it also helps, I think, optimize and leverage, the CFO skill set and experience that you've obviously decided he can contribute to the business in appointing him in the first place.
Thanks, Keith. And I was talking to someone the other day actually, and they said being on a board meeting, having the CFO and CEO both on equal playing fields, And it's like an opportunity there to be able to use your CFO, then get that critique, the challenge, validate what you're saying as well. So it's a great opportunity in that board perspective too.
I think that's right. It's never good to have outright disagreement with your CFO in front of the board, but equally, and therefore I think if there are contentious issues, you should seek to discuss them with your CFO out with the board. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, that's not to say it should be managed in any way. Very much the CFO should be prepared to give his opinion. But I think, again, there is a way, one would seek that if there was any, and maybe his opinion comes from a slightly different perspective, which is absolutely fine. But I think if there's any fundamental issues in terms of the topic under discussion, you should try and resolve them really. I think it's almost a failure if they come out in the board, but it's not about stage management. You let people be themselves. But I think out-and-out disagreement in the board between CEO and CFO is not a good place to be, and boards don't particularly like it either.
And I think it sets the whole tone of the organisation.
I think that's right, yeah.
It'd be great to look at this from a slightly different angle. Keith, I know you wear multiple hats, being a mentor at Criticaleye, and also being a chair and non-executive director at various companies. As a chair, what is so attractive about the CFO stepping into the CEO role? And what value can they bring to the role compared to other candidates? I know we've touched upon it slightly already.
Yeah, listen, I think the immediate attractiveness arises from their, broad knowledge of a business. CFO enables you to fully understand the business model in a way that another functional specialist may not have the same opportunity to. You will clearly understand the financials, and you will understand the underlying performance of the business and its potential. So I think from that point of view, and you obviously should be a known quantity as well to the board as an internal appointment. So I think there are a number of reasons why a CFO is viewed as a good potential candidate to be CEO. Having said that, it's not always the case. There can sometimes be a specific set of circumstances where there's a big engineering issue and quality issue in the business, or there's a big sort of sales commercial issue you've got to deal with, or the business focus is moving to a new geography or something, and there's a very conscious decision by the board to bring someone in with a different set of skills and capabilities to complement the CFO for almost the next stage of the journey. But again, the CFO I think starts with a somewhat inbuilt advantage because of their knowledge and experience of the business and ability to get involved in lots of different elements of business activity.
So interestingly, I was reading an article the other day, and around a third of CEOs within the FTSE 100 have held the CFO position at some point in their career, with 15% of those having been CFO immediately before becoming CEO. I imagine this is partly driven by the ever-expanding role of the CFO, going beyond the finance function, which, Keith, I know you referenced earlier too, where CFOs are now responsible for everything from procurement to IT, and are often also deputising for the CEO already. So why wouldn't they go for the top job?
I think that's right, and beyond that, they will typically also get involved in certain sort of external stakeholder activities, particularly around investor relations and the like. So I think the role of CFO is evolving. I think it evolves as you grow into the role as well, because almost for the first period after your appointment as CFO, it's got to be about focus, particularly if you're an external appointment, understanding the business, making sure you're on top of the fundamentals, getting comfortable with your team, all the building blocks to ensuring almost the success of the finance function. I think as you move and as you effectively tick those elements off, there's then the opportunity for the role to evolve and to broaden, be that strategy, be that M&A, be that, as you say, procurement, be that IT, And you, in some ways, you can often be almost the troubleshooting guy for the chief executive. Back to the point about bandwidth, and the number of areas that the chief executive has, the ability to have a right-hand, person, CFO, that is able to, you're able to, use in a very broad sense, I think is really, really valuable. And it's also great for you as CFO, because it's giving you that developmental experience and that ability to move beyond the core finance function. And certainly that was my experience in my career. And you started out focused on the fundamentals, build out your knowledge of the organization, start to get to know people in the organization, make sure you get out and visit sites, particularly in global businesses, so you can almost touch and feel the business and you're not just stuck in head office. Chief executives do that all the time, they're out and about on the road. I'd encourage CFOs to do that as well, because you pick up so much when you're out in the field, both in terms of assessing the quality of the local business, the team, meeting your finance team locally, but also just that broader business understanding that you pick up, which you're then able to inform the conversations that I have as part of the exec team, or indeed as part of the board, when it comes to addressing specific issues.
And one of the things that we're seeing actually is the customers getting a lot more complicated. And I think if, like you said, getting on the ground, CEO and CFO, whether together or separate, is so important. Speaking to those individuals who see what's going on day in, day out, like you said, can bring it all back into the organisation.
I think that's right. And I think the smart thing, the way I like to think it was smart, but I ran it with my CFO, was we would agree a schedule of visits at the beginning of the year, because only very occasionally would we double up, because actually we could get sort of more bang for our buck. And they say, well, I'm going there, I'm going to Australia, you're going to South America, I'm going to North America, you're going to India, and you almost double up and you use him because there's a limit clearly to just physically how many places you can get to over a period of time. You use him as almost an extra pair of ears and eyes in terms of getting out across the business.
Thanks, Keith. One more question for you before we head back into our CFO retreat. As a former CFO turned CEO and current mentor at Criticaleye, what support would you offer to someone transitioning from CFO to CEO?
Well, I think it is a big step, as we described earlier. So I think the role of any mentor is to help support the CEO make that adjustment, maybe because if there are specific areas that are out with his comfort zone or challenges that he's not previously faced, and wants someone that can provide a independent counsel to him personally, or just give him encouragement and support as he makes that move. Even it's as simple as saying, yeah, you're on the right tracks, you're approaching this the right way, because inevitably, first time you do it, you've never done it before, it's a new experience, you're very much in the spotlight, you're very sensitive to make sure you get off on the front foot in terms of the organisation, and particularly with external stakeholders on the board as well. So just somebody that's available to test your thought processes about what is maybe your 100-day plan as chief executive, what how are you going to, what are you going to be, your key priorities are going to be for the business, how are you going to work with your executive team, a number of different areas where mentors perhaps that have had prior relevant experience can not make it's you ultimately needs to make the decision, but can just provide a degree of sort of perspective and maybe their own experiences to bear.
I think the role of the mentor is so important during that time of transition, having that objective sounding board. I think everything's going on in the organisation, you're consumed by the internal machinery. Having someone who's been there, done that is definitely so important. It sounds like you've got a lot of experience to share as well, Keith. So I'm sure a lot of people will learn from you, which is great.
Well, thank you.
This conversation has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us and sharing your insights today on the transition from the Group CFO role to the Group CEO role. If you'd like to learn more about the Criticaleye Inspiring Leaders podcast, you can find all episodes streaming now on Podbean or Spotify. And should you like to learn more about how we accelerate executive and non-executive development, please visit our website. Keith, I look forward to seeing you at the rest of the retreat. Thank you so much again, and take care for now.